not to talk about it as if it's a disease or your body failed you in some way. It didn't just wake up one morning and your ovaries didn't just fail. Like, this didn't happen overnight. There was a series of events that led to these struggles. And a lot of it is we just don't understand what's happening inside our bodies.
Hi, and welcome to The Balancing Point. I'm Dr. John Nieters, and I'm here to make traditional Chinese medicine, functional medicine, and integrative health simple, practical, and fun, so you can restore balance, boost vitality, and enjoy a healthier life every single day. Hi, thank you for joining me again for another episode of The Balancing Point. And today we have a practitioner that I think you're going to really enjoy. She's way up in Maine. In fact, she won the title of Mrs. Maine a couple years ago. So that's pretty awesome. Yeah, I've never won such a title. And so we're happy to have Jen Goddard up today. And one of the interesting things that caught my attention was Jen's approach. And the first thing that she wrote in her biography to me is that she grew up inside a cult. And she used that information and that lifestyle, that training, to really inform a lot of her decisions about life and about medicine in particular, and how that once we get into that type of a structure, it's very difficult not to be totally co-opted by the structure. So I'm really looking forward to having her talk about that. And so she carried out of that lifestyle, how to recognize a system that's shaping your life while it stays completely invisible to you. Hello. We could be talking about medicine there, right? I mean, it's really the gospel. It's like the Catholic Church. You speak in Latin and you don't let anybody know what you're talking about, and you have all the power. So years later, Jen was exhausted, over-medicated, and convinced that her own body had turned against her, which, by the way, a lot of my patients will come in with that feeling. And she saw the same pattern in her health, a body in real trouble and a system busy managing symptoms while the actual causes went unexamined. And so learning to see that system, which is not easy, but takes a lot of work, and work with the body instead of around it, changed the trajectory of her life. So today, Jen's board-certified doctor of natural health, a certified holistic health practitioner, a certified thermographer, and I certainly wish you were a lot closer because I'd like to send a lot of people to her for that, and founder of Thriving Proof in Bangor, Maine, where she practices with another medical doctor, and they just do great work, really treating things in the proper order. So Jen's work centers on the body's terrain. Okay, if you go all the way back to Pasteur, he was in this running argument with another very famous doctor of his time, and Pasteur said, it's all the germs. It's the germs. And the guy he was having the discussions with said, no, it's all the terrain. If you stay healthy enough and your immune system is healthy enough, then the germs aren't going to get you. And the great thing was on Pasteur's deathbed, he said, oh my God, he was right. It is the terrain. And so in the West, of course, we tend not to focus on the terrain. There's a little bit more than there used to be, but really, really, it's focusing on treating symptoms and the things that go along with that. So with that, we're going to have Jen talk about Menopause Is Not a Disease. I love that title, Jen. So why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about just your experience, what got you here?
Yeah. So I was watching a podcast, and there was a medical doctor on there, and she's being interviewed, and she specialized in female hormones, and she was talking about how women deserve a diagnosis, meaning menopause. And she was talking about how when our ovaries fail, and these are the words that she's using. And I think you and I are on the same wavelength, that our words are really important, and how we, our perception and how we manage these things is critical. And that made me so mad. And I said, women need to understand, or it would be helpful if women understood, that their body doesn't break at a certain age. It doesn't just start failing and shutting down. And there are lots of decisions we make in our health, and, lifestyle factors and things that have kind of gotten out of hand, or aren't even looked at in a lot of cases now in conventional medicine, to where then when we go through this time of life, it becomes more of a challenge than it should be. And that's very real, and we can talk about that. But it just really upset me that, women are led to this place where it's great that now we're talking about hormones, because now HRT is becoming more and more popular, and there's a time and a place for all of these different things. And I'm grateful they have these tools and we're having these conversations, but not to talk about it as if it's a disease or your body failed you in some way. It didn't just wake up one morning and your ovaries didn't just fail. Like, this didn't happen overnight. There was a series of events that led to these struggles, and a lot of it is we just don't understand what's happening inside our body. So that's what I'm hoping to do, is to help people understand the process a little bit more, because when you understand what it's trying to accomplish, you can support those things, those functions, those structures, and more meaningful and intentional way, so that it's not just feeling like it's by accident, and maybe I'll hit it and maybe I won't, and maybe I'll get cancer and maybe I won't. It's like it isn't so haphazard.
Gotcha. As I mentioned to you before we got on the air, um, in the early 1900s, traditional Chinese medicine had really been kind of pushed to the wayside a little bit. Dr. Sun Yat-sen came to the United States and studied medicine. He had a lot of power, went back to China and said, oh, we've got to start practicing this new medicine. And that happened for a few years. And then Mao came into power, and Mao said, oh my God, we can't afford this medicine. So he reopened the acupuncture colleges and really, really supported their growth. And one of the things he did is he assigned the job of writing a textbook on each, like endocrinology, gynecology, etc., to one of the major colleges. And the woman that wrote the book on gynecology turned in her notes, and they said, "Oh, wait a minute, this isn't complete. You don't have anything on menopause." And she said, "Why would I put menopause in there? It's not a disease." Well, pretty much at gunpoint, she had to write a section on menopause. But you're so right. It's not a disease. It's a turning point in life, certainly, but certainly, and it couldn't be more normal, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. When we understand that's why I love Dr. Lisa Mosconi's work. I'm not sure if you read any of her stuff, but she talks about the neurological transition and how your brain, yes, those estrogen receptors, as we don't, our levels lower, now your body's looking for a different fuel source. But unfortunately, our metabolic system is so compromised and so, confused these
yeah.
days, especially for the average American, that when it goes to shift to those fuel sources, it doesn't have any of these resources over here. And just understanding that concept alone and digging into that a little bit deeper can bring so much clarity for women. And what are we really looking at here? Are we looking at these symptoms, as a result of something else? Or are we looking at menopause as a disease that and it's not, it's the product of something else if you're struggling in menopause.
A few years ago, I was reading an article, and it was talking about an anthropologist who was working with a particular indigenous culture in Africa. And she asked him a lot of questions over many days, and finally got to menopause and said, "So what symptoms do you have at menopause?" And they just kind of looked at each other and they didn't understand. And the woman's usage of the language wasn't perfect, so she brought in an expert to ask that question. And so they asked the question, and the woman said, "Well, like what kind of symptoms?" And so they talked about hot flashes and night sweats and vaginal dryness, etc. And all of the women started crying. They said, "Oh my God, do women really go through that where you live?" Because their lifestyle was so simple and with the land and their circadian rhythms. So they didn't go through a hard menopause like we do in the US. And so
Yeah.
we've come to accept that as normal, which is a word I don't really like. Common. It's
Common.
common, right? It's
Yeah.
not normal.
That's
So
right.
anyway, um, and so in your bio, you're talking about drainage before detox, which I love. I find often practitioners will throw the kitchen sink at things, trying to kill off organisms, and the body can't get rid of the waste products from them. So, um, talk about that. Why drainage before detox?
Well, usually people are in these situations because, one of the contributing factors, there's never one magic bullet, right? It's usually a combination of different factors that are accumulating. But your drainage pathways are usually compromised. And that's what leads to some of this backup, so to speak, to where a detox is even necessary. So, if that's the case, then if we think about it, just prompting or trying to force your body to detox more without an exit plan, it's like going to
Right.
war without an exit strategy isn't going to work out so well. And we're just going to increase the backup, or we're going to be circulating things in a way that, okay, we might have let go of this over here, but now we've created an issue over here. So, and that's not super helpful either. And then all of the energy that the body's expending and wasting essentially in having to do that. So, our resources, because our health is less than what we would like it to be. Our genetics each generation is more and more compromised. So, our toxin level is higher and higher. And so all of our challenges are becoming greater and greater. So the last thing we want to do is ask it to do more of that work with no meaningful impact at the end of the day. So if we don't open up those drainage pathways, there's primary drainage pathways and secondary drainage pathways. So think primary is like the highway, right? And then your secondary pathways are like the on-ramp.
Mhm.
Secondary would be like sinuses, your skin, right? Things like that. Your primary is, your lymphatic, your lungs, your liver, kidneys, so your secondary pathways, if you've got, sinus issues or eczema or skin issues, whatever, doesn't matter what specifically it is, but if it's coming out in that pathway, right, it's telling us that, hey, there's some primary pathways that need more support here. And you can clear the on-ramp as often as you like until you clear the backup on the highway. The on-ramp's just going to keep back, that's the symptom management as opposed to digging a little bit deeper and going to root cause. So the drainage pathways are really important for so many reasons. Our sex organs are a secondary pathway. People don't realize when we menstruate as women, we let go of a lot of junk that way. They tested menstrual blood and found PFAS and all kinds of interesting stuff in there. So, that's again another drainage pathway. If there's issues there, then we need to look a little bit deeper and ask more questions. Why?
Wow. Yeah. And I really appreciate that approach. Open everything up before you dump a bunch of sewage into your gut, and when it can't get out. Uh, I did have a patient come in a couple weeks ago, and I talked to her about that very thing. And I said, but will need to detox you, right? We just got to
Mhm.
get things open first. And she
Yeah.
said, when she came back, well, I went to my doctor, told him I was going to do a detox. And he said that was ridiculous. Nobody is toxic, right? So I gave her about half a dozen studies showing the number of toxins in cord blood. So this is before a baby's been
Yeah.
exposed to the world at all. They're coming in with hundreds
Mhm.
hundreds of different toxins, many of them carcinogenic, and multiple other problems. I said, so, the idea that you came into the world with this, and now you're exposed to these toxins every day, all day. How are you going to get rid of them? So, yeah, the drainage. Um, and so you do a lot of different things. So you do thermography also. Is it mostly breast thermography or whole body?
Whole body. Usually the minimum I recommend is half body at least,
Mhm.
because then we can get a look at carotid and all kinds of other areas. Dental is a big one, that most people don't think of as being an issue to the rest of their health. But our teeth are like circuit breakers to different areas of our body. So it's a really important one. And dental comes up a lot in people. So there's a huge connection with cardiovascular, Alzheimer's, all kinds of things. It goes in every direction. So that's a
Yeah,
big one. So I love the half body the most. I think that's at a bare minimum, let's do a half body at least.
I
Then you can
love
get
it. I
lymphatics in
just love it.
anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I, when I've looked at studies where they've examined arterial plaque, it's always full of dental bacteria that have
Mm.
migrated and caused problems in the cardiovascular system. I had an event. There was a guy in our neighborhood here that had been doing a lot of thermography work, and he had a breast thermographer that worked there all the time, and then he did whole body. And so I went out with my wife so that she could get breast thermography because I'm a strong believer in it. And so he grabbed me because we had done radio shows kind of back to back. And so he grabbed me and took me into his office. He was like a little kid. He's like 80 something years old. but loves what he does. And he did a thermography. And he said, "Oh, you better get this fixed." Right. And so it was like this big hot spot. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience.
Well, and it helps people to visualize their progress too, which is I love that piece of it. And so they can tell a lot of, doing what we do, a lot of people say, well, how do I know if I'm really getting better? I feel better, but how do I know I'm really doing anything? Well, this gives you a visual way to see that, right? And then it's also so much more preventative because it can see things way before anything happens, like using the breast as an example. It can pick up activity 10 years before something's big enough to come up on a mammogram. So why would we wait? And usually at that point, a lot of times it is something. So why would we wait until that point to decongest the breast
Right.
tissue and get the drainage pathways flowing and all of that good stuff? So it doesn't make sense if you have the opportunity to do it. I'd much rather deal with something when if you're a woman, I tell people, if you're a woman and you just got your first mammogram and here they found something and you're terrified and I told you, well, 10 years ago we could have done something about this and it would have been nothing.
Right.
You'd be pissed. You'd be very,
Right.
very mad, right?
Exactly.
So they don't want that to get out so much, but that's the truth of it. It's would you rather deal with this when it's very easy, or do you want to wait until it's potentially a challenging issue?
Yeah. And in my area, at least, most of the medical doctors just don't even want to look at thermograms. When we do them, the patient will take them in. They go, I don't know what that is. There was one doctor in town, though, that said, yeah, I think thermograms are great. I don't do them because we don't know how to treat them. And I told the patient, yeah, but we do, right? There are
Yes.
things that can be done, right?
Well,
Because
and
you're
that's what
getting it
people
so
say. They
early.
say, well, why didn't my doctor do this? And it's like, because they don't have tools for that. They have breast cancer drugs, they have mastectomies, they have biopsies, they have tools for once it is something or may potentially be something. They don't have tools for in this space. But like you said, we do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I used to do a lot of seminars before the pandemic, and now I do more webinars. But the pandemic, I would at least twice a year do one on breast health, and women left stunned at how much they could do and how little they knew about breast health. It's like, why don't they teach some of these things in high school health classes, right? It just irritated me after every time I taught that class that
Yeah.
women really didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And now, I mean, even on the topic of breast cancer, we think about estrogen and it being itself the issue. Well, a lot of times it's genetics that are able to process and clear out those estrogen metabolites that are an issue. So being aware of that is helpful because we can bring in other tools to do that work for our body if we're compromised in that area. And then there's other receptors. Nobody ever talks about the E3, E1. These other aspects of estrogen that where testosterone is vital in that process. And how many women have had their testosterone levels checked or have any idea about DHEA or know any of these things?
right.
It's the difference between driving school and a body shop. Conventional medicine is a great body shop, but you want to avoid the body shop. You don't want to use the body shop as your driving school. Doing what we do, we can help educate and help teach them to hopefully prevent needing that body shop. And this is your driving school. So I have so much fun in that space and I love helping women do that.
Well, I love your examples. I love it. A body shop or, yeah, driving school. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Even doctors the gynecologists run such a sparse number of lab tests.
Yeah.
And the lab tests are not that expensive. I rarely see, unless it's from a naturopath, I rarely see testosterone done or free testosterone or sex hormone binding globulin. All these things that are so in, incredibly
Or
important.
even insulin. I
Yeah,
mean, how many times do you see insulin checked?
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
some
Your
of the most
A1C is
basic
fine,
labs.
so we're not going to check anything else. And
And
often
yet,
we
how
don't
many
check
times have
A1.
you seen a normal glucose, a normal A1C, and insulin that's through the roof,
Yeah, exactly.
right? All the time.
Yeah, especially in our culture, right? So you seem to be open to a wide variety of treatments for women. It sounds like even hormone replacement. But why doesn't balancing the hormones actually fix the problem? What's the deeper level?
Yeah, and that's where, it's helpful to educate people, what is an actual hormone problem and what is not, So I find that when we do the work in the right order, it's very rarely very rarely necessary at the end. And a lot of times it's, well, these are the things that I'm willing to do and these are the things that I'm not willing to do, right? So, whether there's lifestyle factors or metabolic factors that need to be addressed, things like that. So, sometimes it's having, just educating them. But then at the end of the day, women at that stage of life typically have been, their brain has shifted in a way that, okay, my kids are grown. I can focus more on my career. If you're like me and you had your kids younger and then now you're in your career space, right? And you're working really hard and now you're exhausted for a different reason because you're in your, divine male space.
Hmm.
Right? So flourishing in that area. And then we just don't want it to be hard. We don't want one more thing to be hard. Life is overwhelming. There's social media, your cell phone. No, you can't get away from work. So we want it to be easy and not overwhelming. So not everybody's willing to do the work sometimes that it takes to get there. And then maybe HRT can be helpful in that space. Or sometimes it's, I'm going to kill somebody. So do a little bioidenticals, for right now while I'm working on the root cause so that nobody dies, kind of thing. And I can get some sleep. And, that can be a good time to use it. But when you find women that are willing to do the work, or hopefully, the best of the best would be to learn these things, like I said, driving school, right, at an even younger age. So this way, by the time you hit menopause, it's smooth sailing and you can go through it clearly.
Yeah.
But worst case scenario, do the work and it's hard until it's easy. Brushing your teeth at 3 was hard, but now it's easy and you don't even remember you did it, so it can feel like that in the beginning and it can feel overwhelming in the beginning, but it never goes wasted. You do that work and I tell people, even if you did, whether it's bioidenticals or just regular HRT, you're not going to do that for the rest of your life. Eventually, you got to pay the piper. Eventually, you've got to figure out this shift in function. And so that's what I think is important.
Awesome. I want to circle back on one thing you were talking about with the stress. Your stress points have shifted, right? From your kids to your profession. And what I find is, some women will come in and acknowledge they're under stress, but a lot of them, it is so insidious. Their lives are so busy. I've got parents who have got 3 kids, and it's like debating who's going to take who to, down to Southern California for this softball tournament, who's going to this basketball tournament. And they don't even realize that is not how people live their lives.
No.
I'm 75. I played sports my entire life, until I was in my 40s. My mother never even came to a game, and I never expected her to. She certainly didn't go to my practices. My dad would
Right.
show up for important games, right? But it wasn't this constant, nobody drove me around like that. And so there are these insidious kind of underlying stressors that a lot of women just don't recognize. My wife is the acupuncturist for the San Francisco 49ers football team. And they're
Nice.
back in camp. They're starting their season soon. She's going to be flying to Australia with them. And the other day I said, honey, we need to work to de-stress you. And she looked at me, she said, I don't have any stress, right? And she also works in our clinic, right? So she works 6 and 7 days a week. She loves it. It's, she actually thrives on it, but she doesn't even acknowledge that stress. So I'm going to have her listen to this podcast. So,
Yes, yes. And a lot of times we don't realize that our stress system is just fried and
yeah,
it has checked out, right? So some people come to me and they'll say, "Oh, my cortisol, I know it's high." So it's like, "No, your adrenals aren't even getting out of bed anymore." Like
right.
there's
Yeah,
there's nothing happening anymore. Like we need to first jumpstart the system and we've gotten to the point where now there isn't even anything
yeah,
left. And we need to be more proactive there with people because these levels of stress, like you said, have become common and
yeah,
we call them normal. And this is just the way we live life now. And that's one of the things that I do appreciate about moving to Maine, especially from South Jersey, is the pace of life is slower in general, overall. So that's nice. Now when I go back to Jersey and everything is like chaotic and crazy and It's like, oh, that's why I was on antidepressants here.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. So it makes total sense now, but we don't realize that life like that exists. Like you were talking about the difference between when you were little, but it does still exist and we can still have great quality of life and still function.
Yeah. I yesterday, actually, I was going over a Dutch test with somebody, a woman that actually works in my office. And I said, how do you get up in the morning? Looking
Yeah.
at her hormone levels and particularly her cortisol profile. And it was like, oh my God, do you drink coffee? Well, no, because it doesn't work anymore. Yeah, that's because you have nothing to
Nothing left.
activate, right?
Right.
You got
Yeah.
nothing there. And it was truly shocking. And she's in her doctoral program now. She's already licensed, but she's still pushing forward. And it's like, you better slow down.
Yeah.
This is not a good picture. Um,
Yeah.
so you were talking about kind of fixing the stuff that's underneath the hormone support. Any particular testing that you like to do? Sounds like you do pretty much of everything.
Yeah, well, insulin, I love looking at insulin. I mean, it's such a factor for so many people. We don't realize when we talk about hormones that, there's our body has so many hormones. It's not just estrogen, right? We then that gets the spotlight in a lot of cases, but there's so many hormones. Melatonin's a hormone. All of these things. And it's, when we look at insulin, well, just the whole pool of hormones, we forget that the resources that these hormones use, they all kind of pull from the same bucket. It's like baking a cake. It doesn't matter if the cake's vanilla or strawberry or chocolate. The foundational systems of these hormones are very similar. And it's just kind of like the flavor at the end sort of thing, right? In a lot of cases. So if we think about our hormones that way, then and insulin is over here sucking up all of the resources, well, there's not going to be a whole lot left over for other things like cortisol. And is another one that sucks up a lot of resources. You hear the cortisol steal all the time, right? Your body's thinking survival; it has to keep you alive. So you don't always have to make babies, but you've got to stay alive. So it's going to prioritize these things, and you want to make sure that you're looking at all of the pieces. We want to ignore the insulin because I don't want to have to change how I eat. Can't you just give me a patch?
Right.
Well, we could do that, but that's
I'll
not
give
gonna
you a
work out as well.
GLP-1 and an estrogen patch, and life is perfect.
Right. And life is right. And then all of a sudden they've got bone disease and they have 0 muscle mass, and we don't know what
Right.
to do.
Exactly. It's funny you mentioned the estrogen. So we sometimes have my patients use a Mira. I don't know if you're familiar with
I
that.
love Mira. I
Oh, really?
recommend Mira to play. I love it.
Gotcha. And so we do it a lot with fertility patients, but we have other patients we use it with too. And uh,
Yep.
and so just so the listeners know, with a Mira, you take first morning urine, put a dipstick in it, and then put it in this little device. And in 20 minutes, it'll read out your hormone levels. And we can also get it live. We can tune into their Mira account. And so one day, one of Catherine's friends uh, sent her a text and said, I'm locked in my room. I'm never coming out. I hate my children. I hate my life. Everything is, it just went on and on. So we looked at her Mira, and her progesterone levels didn't even register, basically, right? We said, well, remember that progesterone we gave you? Try putting a little on your gums, and then let's see how you do. And so then we could see that her progesterone level went up significantly. And we got a text saying, now I remember why I love my children. They're so wonderful, right? But, it's
Love it.
really the balance, and people look at estrogen, but it's like you said, it's a balance of all of this that makes the difference.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
the relationship between them, right? If you
Yeah.
focus on one and you elevate one without supporting these other, it's a balance. There can't be just all or nothing of one, and that's it. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how it is for you back there in Maine. It sounds like it's a much better pace. I'm thinking about moving back there after talking to you. Um, But here, I interviewed a doctor a little while back, a retired gynecologist who now does basically coaching for menopausal women. And
Mhm.
she went on a rant, a very nice rant about how older women get such short shrift in the medical system that it's like, oh, you're just getting old, dear. Here, take this, 5-minute appointment and they're out the door. Do you see that happening?
Oh, absolutely. And and even in not even necessarily older women, but women that are approaching or aging, a lot of times they're just, if the doctor doesn't know what to do, which that's, 9 times out of 10, they're
Right.
not sure what to do with all of their issues. So they just dump the, oh, it must be your hormones.
Yeah.
And then they send them on their way. Or, I was a young mom and they give you, I call it the new mom cocktail. It was the antidepressant, it was the anxiety pill, it was the sleeping pill. Here's your GERD medicine, your gastritis, your Prilosec, and call it a day. And you should be very happy now.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's women at every stage, but especially older women, because they're just, they again, they don't have tools in their toolbox for
Yeah.
these things, and they're not helping them prevent these situations either. So
Right.
they're masking it all day, every day. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, now it's just your hormones. There's nothing that we could do.
It reminds me when I was back in my master's program many decades ago. I had one teacher who said several times, um, traditional Chinese medicine school is relatively easy. Med school is incredibly difficult, really difficult. He said, however, traditional Chinese medical practices are much harder to do because you actually have to reason through everything. Where
Mm.
doctors have it very easy. You come in with what looks like depression, they throw a drug at you. They don't have to look more deeply than that. If that doesn't work, they do another drug. Oh, you've got indigestion? Here, take Prilosec. And so with Chinese medicine, we can't do that. And it sounds like in your practice, you don't do that, right? It's really the individual that matters, right?
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and I found that to be true. That's why I didn't go to med school. I was pre-med, and I saw the level of burnout and
Mm.
illness with those people. It's like, that doesn't make sense to me. So, anyway, I escaped that trap. So,
Yeah.
um,
I have a rule, I don't want to go to someone for health advice that's not healthier than I am. And
exactly.
so many doctors in the system, not only are they not taking care of their patients, but they're not taking care of themselves either. So, and by taking care of themselves, I don't mean sitting on a yacht somewhere, because that's not what I mean. But they're sitting there smoking their cigars, drinking their out, all of their obese, it's just all of the things. And it's like, well, I don't know that I want health advice from that person. So,
Yep.
it's kind of like going to a hairdresser and you don't really like the way they keep their hair. It's like, well, then they might not be able to help you as much.
There was a fellow that I interviewed recently, very bright doctor, and one of his books was entitled, "What Does Your Doctor Look Like Naked?" And kind of that was kind of the point, right? It's
I
like,
love it.
yeah, are they taking care of themselves? Do they have a big
No,
pot belly or not? Right? I just thought that was a cute
none.
title. We
That
ran
is a
into,
cute fun part.
yeah, we a few months ago we had all these patients that had come from Idaho, and even Catherine's sister, who used to be a dog breeder, said she found the best vet she'd ever met in Idaho. So I was interviewing this doctor. I said, "Why are all the good doctors in Idaho and even the good vets?" He said, "Because we have a very active lifestyle here. And so we want to be here. We got winter sports, we got summer sports. It's like, oh, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. They're taking care of themselves. So then they do a better job with their patients." It was
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you do a lot of functional lab work, right? Yeah. And do you do some DNA testing? Yeah.
Yeah, I love DNA analysis for two reasons. A lot, and I'm sure you hear this all the time too. People will come in and the reason why they can't do anything about a certain situation is, well, it's genetic. My mom had the problem, my dad had the problem, my aunt had the problem, right? And so on and so forth. And so I love the DNA analysis because one, it often shows what is not genetic, that hey, you really do have a lot of control over this situation. It's not just because people don't they think of genetics as, well, I have the same problem someone older than me had in my family, instead of, well, I live the same lifestyle. I was raised on the same food. I have the same belief systems. I have the same traumas, whatever the case may be. That's where a lot of these symptoms come from, as opposed to, well, is it really a genetic issue? So I love it we dispel a lot of those myths, and,
Mhm.
we can eliminate that from the excuse bucket. And then on the other side, the things that are genetic brings us an awareness to where, okay, I just need more tools around this space and I can be more intentional in this way. So, like, for example, when I did mine, I realized that I don't clear estrogen metabolites very well at all genetically. And it made a lot of sense based on what I had experienced when I was younger. And, had I known this then, I would have been more intentional in these ways and, given my body resources to do what it couldn't do genetically, right? So I think it's very empowering for those, for either side of it, either things that we're not aware of that couldn't possibly explain why because people get frustrated. I'm sure your patients feel the same way. Like, well, why do I have to do all of this? And Johnny Schmo down the street, smokes and drinks and eats McDonald's every day and is just fine. Well, first of all, define fine, right? But
Right?
second,
Exactly.
they could be dealing with a completely different blueprint that just hasn't crapped out yet.
Yeah.
Because it's going to happen eventually with that lifestyle, right? But so I think, when people, it just helps them understand the body that they're working with and the tools and resources they do or they don't have. And it gives them more power. And that's why I love the DNA analysis, because the power they get from that.
That's
So,
awesome. I'm going to have to contact you and find your favorite testing. We
yeah,
kind of bounced around a little bit.
yeah,
So we'll see what you're using, if that's okay.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And it's fascinating. I'll run into, like, I had one patient recently, a lot of dementia, parents, grandparents, etc. And I said, "Would you like to do some testing?" She said, "Oh God, no, 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 I don't want to know." I said, "Well, really, you do want to know, because
Yeah,
there are workarounds for all of these things, right?" And
yeah,
sure enough, and I said, "Now the simplest thing, we can just do an APOE test just to see what that risk factor is. And then if you want to go deeper, there's, a lot of other things we can look at." So she came
yeah,
back as an APOE 4/4, which is the
yeah,
worst. And I said,
yeah,
"Okay, great. Now we know what we're working with. Here's your
yeah,
new diet plan. We're going to shift these around. We're going to change this. And, we'll get your risk factors minimalized." And
yeah,
so knowing that, having that information is power. It really helps you
yeah.
hone in. So I'm
Yeah,
happy to hear
and
that you're.
be so more intentional and not get frustrated with the process, right? Because sometimes if someone just comes in off the street and, well, they have, these concerns, and it's like, well, why do I have to do all of this?
Right.
It's just, I put in less effort, or compromise a little bit less. And so they understand a little bit more of the severity, and they know, well, these are the reasons why I want to do this.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so what I hear from you is you're really always looking for what's at the root of the problem, not just throwing some whatever you're using, supplements, etc., at the symptoms. And
Yeah.
that's really what a good doctor should do, in my opinion. And so I'm very impressed with your style. I wish you were closer. um, and so when you're looking at functional lab work, can you
Mhm.
just talk for a minute about how that can differ from the standard or quote, quote normal blood work that you get from a typical HMO? What does that
Yeah.
inform you of?
Yeah, they're very different. You go to your traditional PCP, through even if you're paying cash, or you have an insurance that's dictating it, whichever, they typically run the same labs because oftentimes they're the only ones that they've been trained in, if at all, in conventional. So they'll usually do the CMP, the CBC. Maybe they'll do an A1C, depending on the situation, a lipid panel, depending on the age. Those are usually the standards that they do. We'll do all those things, but then we also add things like homocysteine and vitamin D and, your B vitamins and all of these, one insulin, we talked about that. That's huge. Like all of these bigger MMA, all these bigger, things that give us a much better picture of what may or may not be happening in the system. And then, so one is just running the test,
Right?
running the extra tests, and then two is looking at them through a different lens. Lab ranges are designed to identify disease. Well, you might not have a disease yet, but it doesn't mean that, those different terrains are struggling in a way. So when you can read them line by line and look at it, okay, from functional ranges, all right, functionally, we want insulin under 5, right? If they see an insulin of like 10 or 15, they're like, oh, that's fine. We're going to wait till you have diabetes. No, don't wait till you have diabetes, right?
Right.
By the time it starts showing in your glucose and then eventually your A1C, like again, 10 years ago, we could have knocked this out of the park, right? And prevented this in a lot of cases. So, that's really frustrating. You want to get to these markers and start monitoring them beforehand. Iodine, we look at, all of these things that get missed and just fly under the radar. And so one is running the broader panels, running the extra tests, and then two, looking at them through functional ranges. And then once we have those functional ranges, we can put them, group them by system. Well, these are your drainage pathways, and this is, these are the ones that make those up, and then or by terrain. Okay, this is more of a mitochondrial strain than it is a drainage strain in some cases. So, we look at them from different perspectives and then tie all of that together based on all of the other information that we have, right? And that we've gathered that they don't
That's,
have the time to do or talk about in conventional.
well, and I find that patients are often surprised at how inexpensive some of the testing is. I mean, so there's a major HMO out here, and they'll run like a Chem 6. We run a Chem 14. We want a lot more information. Well, that Chem 14 is $7 when we order it, and a CBC is $5 when we order it. And it kind of shocks people. Like, you mean for $12 I can get a more complete panel? Yeah, and then we should add these other few things, and it'll get up to about $40, right? And they'll kind of look and I'll say, how much are you spending on your health insurance a month? Right. And they kind of they're taken aback. And what are you really getting for that? You're going to get emergency care for sure, and you have to have that. But really, it's worth spending a little extra to find out, like you said, 10 years in advance, what your risk factors are. So I keep a bunch of mortality tables around, right, with the U-shaped curves. And it's like, we want you right here. Your A1C, we want it at 5.0 to 5.2. That's where we want. When they say you're okay at 5.6, you're really not okay at 5.6.
No, yeah, it's so true. And when I hired one of the nurses that I have here now, and she saw the costs for the labs, and she's like, "Oh my gosh," she's like, "Do you know what people pay in the hospital?" I'm like, "Yes, I do know what they pay, and this is the difference." And we have so many people that'll say, "Well, I spend all this money for health insurance. Can't I just run the labs through that?" And okay, fine. If that's what you want to do. The first time that we did that, the person, the insurance paid for what they were willing to pay for, which is the CMP, the CBC,
Right.
which like said literally dollars, right? And then months later, they got a bill in the mail for over $5,000
Yes.
for the difference because they got charged the insurance price for all of these other labs.
Exactly.
And she called us crying, and she's like, "So now we warn people, we're like, well, you can do that, but that's not, the most cost effective way is to pay for it out of pocket and then take your receipt and send it to the insurance company and they'll reimburse you the $5 or whatever they would have paid." Right.
Right. Yeah.
And at that point, is it worth the work? But, there's other ways around it, but going through the system, everything is so much more expensive. I have a company coming in September to do breast ultrasounds for people.
Oh.
And which I'm so excited about because I hate that women feel pressured into getting mammograms when they know they have dense breasts. They know every time it's fibrocystic, and then I have to go for a second one. And the insurance company says I have to do two before they'll pay for the ultrasound. And they go through, these hoops every time. And it's painful. It's, there's risk factors involved, all these things. So now they can get their ultrasound. They can pay $295 out of pocket for it. And they don't need a prescription. They don't need a referral. They don't need anything for it. And hey, if you have dense breasts and you don't want to go through all of those hoops, just come get your ultrasound.
Yeah, I've got a couple of females that every year I have to talk them down from the ledge. I got my mammogram, and they're calling me back, and they said I have to go in right away. I said, okay, calm down. We go through this every year. They're going to check you again, and then they're going to do an ultrasound, and you're going to be fine. Yeah. Well, why won't they just do the ultrasound first? Because that's the way the insurance company does it, right? And it's so sad.
It is sad, and it's emotional, and it's scary and traumatic, and just so many things that we don't need in this life.
Yeah.
So
anything else on your mind that you'd like to impart the knowledge to my listeners?
Well, if they're listening to you, they already have a lot of knowledge. So I'm not sure what I could add to that. But
you can add a lot. Yeah, the things that you said are great. Well, part of it's knowledge and part of it's communication skills. and you have great communication skills. Your
Thank
examples
you.
are priceless. In fact, one of the things that I enjoy about doing these podcasts, it's like, oh, I need to start communicating this that way, right? Because, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
you get into your uh, way of speaking, and it matters a lot. So I think you've done a lot here to help
I
enlighten.
try to keep it at that 5th grade reading level.
Oh my
Like,
God,
how would I
absolutely.
understand this if I were 5th grade, right? That's so
Exactly. Here's a freeway on-ramp, right? So I love that.
yes,
Well, it's
yes.
like, I don't know if you've ever seen, Beamer, the company, BEMER, that
Oh,
makes the
yes,
PEMF mats. They've got a
yes.
couple of my favorite videos online, and it shows blood flow before, during, and after a Beamer session. And
Okay.
before, it looks like the LA freeway at rush hour. And you see the off ramps, and there's just a clog of red blood cells there. They can't even get into the capillaries, right? And then they show afterwards, and it's like, wow, check that out. It's just, a free flowing freeway, and you can see the white cells going along the lining of the blood vessels.
Mhm.
It's very fun. I don't sell Beamers, but I love showing that example because in Chinese medicine, one of our most important things that we look at is blood stasis or sticky blood, right? It's critical in so many ways. And patients will say, well, what are you talking about? And I flip my computer around and I show them the video and they go, oh my God, is that what my blood is like? So,
Yeah.
having those examples, and that's one of the things I'm appreciating about you is that you have some great examples for things.
Well, I'm gonna have to find that video because we have PEMF here. And, it's one of those things where, sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their head around. So I'm gonna have
Uh,
to find that video because I have the videos that I've made, but visual, would be nice
yeah,
to include
it
as
was
well.
made. They were made in Germany by the Institute of, I think, Circulation. They're fairly old. They've been up for a while, but if you just put in Beamer and blood flow, it'll pop up, and it's really well done.
Yeah, nice. Yeah,
Yeah, we love.
I think
Go ahead.
yeah. Yeah, I think that all of these tools are so helpful in so many different ways. And like we talked about, people have a lot more control over what they experience than they've been led to believe. I know when I was young and I was, had all of these health issues and infertility, and they had me on tamoxifen, to get pregnant, and all of these, major drugs that I was taking for all different reasons. And, they said, well, there's nothing that you can do about it. And you'll be on these for the rest of your life. And you're going to have these issues for the rest of your life. And so you felt hopeless, and so there was no reason for you to do anything better because, well, it's not gonna matter anyway. And
Right.
then 20 years later, you realize, "Oh, wait, it did matter, and I could have done these things differently then," and it's infuriating. So I think the most important thing I want people to realize is that they have a lot of power and a lot of influence over what they experience, and it's entirely their decision how much of that they wanna tackle and when and how fast and all of those good things. But if you work with somebody that's good, they'll be able to take you at your pace, whatever that is. And something is always better than nothing.
Boy, that's a great place to wrap up. That just put it in a nutshell right there. And to be patient. Yes, you want to fix all this, and this week let's take this step. And then
Yeah,
next week we'll take that step. Okay, have you
yeah,
signed up for the gym yet, right? And the coaching aspect. And that's one of the things that we do differently. And MDs, it's not their job, at least in their mind and in the system, is to really coach people to be healthier. And
right.
so that's one huge advantage that we have is we see the importance and we live that. So thank you for kind of wrapping all that up. That was worth the whole show. So, um,
Thank
so Jen, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. It's been absolutely delightful meeting you. And I really do want to thank you for all that you've shared today. And I am going to contact you and find out some of your DNA secrets. So anyway, I want to thank you. I appreciate you being on. Bless you.
thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me on The Balancing Point. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave a review. Feeling out of balance? Most approaches just manage symptoms. Here, we get to the root. So real healing, real clarity, and balance can begin. Visit alamedaacupuncture.com. That's alamedaacupuncture.com to learn more explore our supplements, or book a call. We'd love to hear from you.